Now, earlier in the course, we of course already planned our React frontend, our single page application pages we want to have there. And pages here really means different React components, which then will be loaded with help of a third-party library that reads the browser URL and instructs React to render different components. And here is our plan. Now, we'll not implement everything we see here in this module. We will add all these pages or components, but the authentication part you see on the right, that will be added later in the course once we also added authentication on the server side. So it's something we can ignore for now. We can't really implement right now, but we can build the general skeleton and idea of the entire application. So let's do that now. Let's start with that. And to get started, I have a brand new project. You find that project setup attached to this lecture here. You can simply extract it and then run npm install in the extracted folder. And thereafter, you can run npm start. Here I am again using that built-in terminal in my IDE. npm start to bring up that development server serving our React single page application. Here it is. Now, don't be worried regarding the gray background. That will make sense later once we start adding more and more components and styles. This will be the general background color of this application. Here, of course, it looks a bit strange. Later, it won't. And of course, also not a must do, but I will use it, is the developer tools here. I like to have them open so that I can quickly see any errors we're getting and so on. Of course, you don't have to do that, but I will work on this project with the developer tools opened. And with that, let's go back and let's start working on this application and add components, pages, and more. But of course, the question is, how does that all work? Well, there are different ways of getting started, but since we know that we will have different pages, I like to add these pages, which are regular React components, just components which will control everything on the page, step by step. So for that, I'll first of all add a new subfolder in source, a new subfolder which in the end will hold my pages. Now there are two approaches you could follow. You could, for example, work with a pages folder, which will hold your components that are in the end rendered as full screen pages. And you can add a components folder to hold your components which are not used as full screen components, but instead which are only used on parts of every screen. For example, a button component could be in the components folder. The new place page component could be in the pages folder. You can do that, and for an application of this size, it would certainly work. However, it's not the approach I will use, because for bigger applications, it can be hard to then quickly find your different components and pages if they're all managed in two main folders and then a couple of subfolders. Instead, I will split my logic by feature, which means I will create a new folder in the source folder, which I'll name places. And in there, I will have a pages folder and a components folder. So my idea is that I will have my place-related components in the places components folder and my place-related pages in the, well, places pages folder. Now, why do I do that? Because I'll also add a user folder next to the places folder, so directly in the source folder, where I effectively will set up the same structure, components, and then user pages. Now, this allows me to organize my components in a bit better way because I have user-related components and pages in the user subfolders and places-related components in these subfolders. Side note, if you took my complete guide, pages was effectively named containers because in React you also sometimes refer to components that have a lot of state management logic in them as containers, and pages tend to be components with a lot of state management logic in there. I will opt for pages instead here to make it really clear that these are the components loaded with the help of this routing package, which we still have to install. Now I will also add a third folder in source, and that is a shared folder, because we will have some general purpose components and also some other features which don't really belong to either places or users. So in shared, I'll also add a components folder, no pages folder, because pages by default can't be shared. They can't be shared amongst multiple pages because a page is a standalone thing. And later we'll also add other things here to the shared folder. For now, just a components folder. So this is the general structure I like to work with. It's one possible structure, not the only correct one, but it is one which I think is particularly helpful when working on bigger projects. So with that general structure set up, we prepared the folder structure. Now let's actually quit the development server with Control-C and install a new package. And that new package which I want to install is that routing package. That routing package is a third-party library we can integrate that will help us read the URL the user entered, for example, localhost /nothing versus /users or something like that, and will then load different React components on the screen based on the URL entered. Technically, we still are on the same single HTML page, but that routing package will tell React that now everything on the page should be replaced with the content of component B or of component A, and so on. The name of that package is React Router DOM. So let's npm install with --save React-router-DOM. This is a third-party library not managed by the React team, but a very popular library that helps us implement this routing logic so that we don't have to manually parse the URL and then do different things based on it. So this now installs this. Let's wait for this to finish. So installation finished for me. And now we can use that package to load different components as full screen pages in the end. Now, if you want to learn all about routing and the React router, of course the official docs of the React Router DOM package are a great starting place, or as also mentioned before, in my complete guide, you also learn more about routing. Here, we will only use the features of the package which we need for this specific application. So how does routing work then? It starts in the app.js file, because in the end, this is our root component, right? It's the component we render into that place here in index.js. So app component really is the starting point of our entire application. It's the first thing which is getting rendered. So it's inside of this component here created with the function keyword, which also is fine. You could also change this to use the arrow function syntax. So here in this component it is where I want to set up routing. Now how do we set up routing? Well, we first of all import something from that React Router DOM package. And that something is the browser router. Here I'm using this import syntax instead of that syntax because React Router DOM actually is a package that has named exports, which means it exports multiple things by their name. And then here this is using this curly brace syntax to target specific exported things by their name. And here I need the browser router, which is exported. And I will also rename this with as to just router. This is a feature you can use with ES6 modules, which this in the end is, to assign an alias to something you're importing. And now we can use that router here in the app component as our root JSX element. We wrap this around everything that is part of the app that should be able to use the router. So we wrap this around every route that should be able to use our router. The question is, what should be able to use our router? Well, our pages should be loaded with help of the router. For example, if we go to the user pages folder, there we can add a users.js file. And in there, I want to create a very basic React component where we import React from React. And then I'll name this users. And this is a regular React component where I then export it as a default. And in here, I return users works, just some dummy text so that we see that this is rendered. If this is our users component and we want to load that with the help of routing, whenever the user is on just our domain /nothing, well, then we can go to app.js, and there we now can use another feature from React Router DOM, the route component. Here we can use route as a component, so as JSX code in the end. We're importing this from React Router DOM. And on that route component, which is provided by that package, which can only be used inside of a router, which has to be set up as a surrounding element. There on the route component, we can add a path property and define the path in the URL. So the thing after the domain that should be entered to reach this specific route. So here, /. And what should be rendered when that route is reached? Well, the thing you pass between the opening and closing tags of route. Alternatively, you can also add a component prop to route and then create route as a self-closing component. That also works, but moving forward, this package actually also supports an alternative syntax where you only set up the path on the route component itself, and then you wrap the component that should be loaded for this path inside of the route component tags. So in my case, I'll import users from ./user/pages/users, and then render this here. Now the trick is that this will not always be rendered on the screen, but thanks to this wrapper, thanks to this package, it will only be rendered if our URL path is /. So if I save this now and I restart my development server, we should actually see our user's content on the screen because I am on /nothing by default here, and hence we should see that. So let's wait for the development server to start up. And indeed, I now see users works. Now, if I enter something else, by the way, I also see that though, not just for /nothing. The reason for that is that by default, this path is treated as a filter, which means any path that starts with this will render users. Now, that's not what I want. I want to only render users if the path is exactly this. So exactly /nothing after the domain. You can enforce this by adding another property to route, and that's the exact prop. You can set this to true, but you can also omit this. If you just add it like this, the value that is passed in will be true automatically. This means now this route is only rendered if the path is exactly /. So if I now save this, we see users works, but if I enter something else, we see nothing, because now we're not on exactly /nothing, and therefore this does not work. For that scenario, to make sure that we are not able to end up on unsupported pages, we could import another component from React Router DOM, and that's the redirect component. We can add this here in the router as well, and there on redirect, we use this as a self-closing component. We can add a to property and redirect to /. Now, this code is parsed from top to bottom, and what React Router will do is when the URL changes, it will basically go through all the routes we have set up here, and it will see, okay, if the path is nothing, we render that. If the path is anything else, this will not trigger, and instead redirect will kick in and will redirect us back to /nothing. So if we save that, and I now enter anything else, you see we are automatically redirected to /nothing. So this works exactly as it should, and now we make sure we always end up here if we enter anything but this path. So now we can see our users. Now our users are not everything, of course. We also want to be able to create a new place, for example, and we will fill these components with more life later, no worries. So in our pages, in the places folder, we could add a new place.js file, and in there also create a straightforward component by importing React from React, then creating this function, new place, where we return some JSX code, in my case here just some h2 tag, new place works, so that we see that this also is loaded successfully, and then I export this as a default, new place. Now we can register this as a route as well in app.js. We can duplicate this here, and for example, say if the path is places/new, then I don't want to load users, but I want to load new place. So I'll import new place from /places/pages/new place. And then here, we render new place as a self-closing component here if that is our path. So if we now save that, and I enter anything, I'm redirected to /. If I enter /places/new though, I'm also redirected. Now why is that? Well, that happens because of the way the router works. I said that it would parse this from top to bottom, and indeed, when it encounters this route here, and this here is our path in the URL, it will render a new place. But And that's really important to understand. It doesn't stop thereafter. It still evaluates the lines thereafter as well. And that's good because we could be rendering something totally different here. Let's say a normal footer. We definitely would want to render that below our routes, right? So that on every page we have that footer, for example. So it does still execute the next line, and therefore it does still redirect. To make sure that we don't redirect, but that instead we either render this route, or we redirect, we can import one other component from React Router DOM, and that's the switch component. The switch component can be wrapped around your route definitions, so before the starting route and after redirect. And this now instructs React Router that inside of the switch block, whenever it encounters a fitting route, it will not evaluate the lines thereafter. So it will not redirect if it was able to identify this path here and hence rendered this new place component. So with this switch component wrapped around our routes, if we now enter /places/new again, you see now we're not redirected, and instead we render this. If we enter anything else which does not exist, we are redirected, and therefore now this works as it should. And this is routing in a nutshell with the help of the React Router DOM package. This is how we can still stay in React world, but make sure we render different main components, so to say, which still are regular React components in the end, based on the path the user entered in the URL. And that's how our single page application in the end becomes a multi-page application. It's still all on the same single HTML page with which we started. You can always validate this if you view the page source. That is the single HTML code with the root div. But React re-renders what we see on the screen. Without reloading the page, it just re-renders it based on the URL we enter, thanks to the third-party library here, which simply instructs React which component to render based on which path we entered.